grandiose title, I suppose, is just really a look at how goalkeepers deal with crosses. Originally I was hoping to look at like chips, through balls into the penalty area as well, but yeah, today I'm just looking at dealing with crosses. So first of all, I can use this clicker. Bit about me, I started blogging in July 2015, so I'm very new to this kind of analytics scene. This is my first time at the OptaPro Forum. It's on my blog that's appreciated if you'll visit. And on that I look at keepers, and the research context behind that, and also behind the presentation today, is that I think goalkeepers are a fundamentally undervalued position. So for example, within the top 100 transfer fees of all time, there's only one goalkeeper, which was Buffon all the way back in 2001. Also there's only 14 defenders there, which I think generally shows that defences are kind of maybe misunderstood, which leads to them being bought for cheaper fees generally in the transfer market. And a reason given for this in the book The Numbers Game, I'm sure you've all heard of if you've not read, it talks about in all kinds of analytical scenarios in all kinds of sports. I think even in war it's mentioned, I'm sure Chris will put me right if I'm wrong. Generally there's a kind of a tendency to analyse attacking outputs rather than defensive. So for example in the NFL there might be a tendency to just ask how can my team score touchdowns than how can I prevent the opposition scoring them against me. And the same perhaps during football in terms of looking at how we can score goals. We've got with all these great expected goals metrics, but defence is kind of an under-analysed field. And within what research is done on goalkeepers, all of the research that I'm aware of, like publicly available anyway, all kind of looked at shot stopping, which I guess intuitively makes sense. Shot stopper is kind of a synonym for goalkeepers, but it doesn't take a genius to work out that a goalkeeper needs to do a lot more than just stand on their line and make saves. They need to pass the ball out from the back, they need to take goal kicks obviously, they need to organise the defence, and they need to clear crosses. And I think if we can introduce kind of more holistic analyses to go beyond just looking at shot stopping metrics, we can begin to understand who the best keepers are ideally at all of these facets, and that in turn will provide competitive edge for your clubs if you look into this hopefully. And this is just a quote from Chelsea's kind of well-known goalkeeping coach that one day keeper is not just a shot stopper. So that's kind of the background to this research. Okay, so in terms of dealing with crosses, what really do I actually mean? So when the ball's played into the box, the keeper kind of has three options, and kind of sub-category within that. So they can either come and claim the ball, they can either punch the ball, or they can leave the ball to the defence. All within attempting to claim it, they can drop it, fumble it, and generally make a hash of it, or whatever. The point is, all keepers do some of these things at some point throughout the seasons or throughout a couple of seasons. So if you're just watching one game and a goalkeeper drops across or makes an error, that's not necessarily an indication that over time they're a poor goalkeeper. So hopefully this analysis tries to cut through some of that and find out which keepers do more of the good things more of the good time. More of the time. So it's kind of a probability based, trying to understand which keepers are going to gain good outcomes to defence and ideally claim more of the balls into the box when they come in. Okay, so this is a good example of this from the Leicester Man United game. I'm sure you'll remember the screenshot helpfully provided by Match of the Day. So in the first instance, we have a corner obviously swung into the 6-yard box that Schmeichel came out to claim ahead of the on-rushing Man United player, rolled it out the back to Christian Fuchs. The next thing you know, Vardy's tucked it in 1-0. Great times if you're a Leicester fan. Then on the stroke of half-time, a very similar corner comes in, almost to exactly the same position on the box, and watching this clip back, Schmeichel comes out to claim it, seems to halfway decide that, he's not going to make it, retreats to his line, Schweinsteiger again, as in the previous case where the United player beats the Leicester defence to the ball, Schweinsteiger gets to the ball first, heads the ball in, 1-1. So what this research is kind of aiming at asking is, if Leicester had a different keeper potentially, is there a keeper out there that may have been more likely to come both times and perhaps win Leicester the game? And even are there some keepers that would be unlikely to come for the first one as well? And as a result, Leicester might lose the game 2-0. So how can we quantify how keepers deal with crosses? It's all well and good having an idea of why it might be useful. We could look at claims percentage, for example, which would simply be claims over claims plus fails, which would be an easily calculable metric. But the problem is there is literally no repeatability from season to season on a linear regression, so it's kind of useless. Additionally, it offers poor incentives. If a keeper's just getting judged on how many he catches compared to how many he drops, he could stay on his line the whole time, right, and only come for the ones that he knows he's going to have a really good chance of catching, which would actually lead to the detriment of the defence. How about punch percentage? Well, punch percentage has better repeatability. So in the 2014-15 season, Mignolet, Lloris, Hart and Schmeichel all punched a larger amount than average. And I think there's an R-squared of between 0.3 and 0.4 for this. That is statistically significant, and that shows that these people are likely to punch more in 2015-16 and into the future. But what does punch percentage test? Like a keeper could, I suppose, be a good puncher or a bad puncher. So let me explain. So a keeper could be a good puncher if they catch all of the balls that other keepers would also catch, but they're also like fighting fires, punching other ones that are kind of at the extremes of what's perceived to be like the keeper's limit. But they can also be seen as a bad puncher if they stay on their line and they're punching balls that other keepers would catch. So having a high punch percentage, is that a good thing or a bad thing? We don't really know. So punch percentage, although there's a degree of repeatability, how useful is it? Yeah, that's kind of the problem. So can we do better? I think we can. And today I'm going to introduce two metrics that will ultimately be combined to create like a composite overall KPI to try and judge how keepers deal with crosses into the box. First is claim proficiency, and the second is aggression, and I'll explain these in the next two slides. So claim proficiency. So the logic is some keepers claim more than they punch or fail to claim. The kind of goalkeeping cliche this is built on is that you want the keeper to give confidence to their defence. If they catch the ball rather than spill it, the defence won't have any concerns about the keeper coming out to catch it. There's just generally going to be quite a solid, I guess, general defence to the team, which is obviously great when crosses are coming in. It guarantees possession, catching the ball, so it's better than punching it, and obviously better than dropping it. So which keepers claim more on average when the ball comes into the box? So the rough methodology by which I tested this, I divided the penalty box into these different sectors right at the start, which was just me cutting it down at the start, and I'll talk in the future about how this model could be refined. But this just shows the amount of crosses that were played into the different sectors within the box in the 2014-15 season, and the goalkeepers were compared. So a punch was considered halfway between a claim and dropping it, and then that was all added up, and their claims divided by that total was essentially the percentage they gained, and then it was all weighted for the balls into the various sectors. And when we look at keepers compared to their league average for whether they claim proficiency is above or below kind of the league average, keepers like Neuer and Courtois appear very well, and keepers like Simon Mignolet doesn't appear so well. And Zubakarai of Real Sociedad didn't come out very well at all in their study, so he only actually attempted to catch, I think, 12 crosses in the whole of 2014-15. 6 of those he punched, 3 of those he dropped, and 3 of those he caught. So that kind of gives you an idea, in contrast to someone like Courtois, who caught 60 or 70 of crosses. That's the kind of differentiation we're talking here. So in terms of aggression, the methodology here is the logic is based on the cliche that you want the keeper to dominate the box. That alleviates defensive pressure again, and yeah, it's on the understanding that some keepers will deal with more crosses than others. So how can we test this, and who are they? So the rough methodology was again similar. I just used exactly the same sectors of the box, and then compared how likely a keeper was to come out with when the ball was played into the various sectors. So for example, you've got 43% of ball crosses into the sector just in front of the goal, goalkeepers came to deal with. And then it's like 1%, 2% around the peripheries, which is presumably when it's just a hopeless ball kind of played and there was no real attacking pressure. So then when we compare keepers to their league average, you've got players like Joe Hart ranking in 3rd, and Kasper Schmeichel, and interestingly David De Gea towards the bottom, so keepers that don't often tend to count for that many crosses. And this comparison between Hart and Schmeichel was perhaps interesting, and we remember back to punch percentage, but perhaps we could begin to think that Hart's maybe at the more aggressive, so perhaps better end of being a punchy keeper, and Schmeichel perhaps at the poorer end. So how can we combine the two, and why do we want to do that? Well, it all revolves around incentives. So claim proficiency, the incentive we want to give keepers is to catch the ball rather than punching it and dropping it in an ideal situation. However, like claim percentage at the start, this could be gained by keepers staying on their line and only catching balls they were certain they could get to. Aggression, on the other hand, we want it to incentivise the keeper to come and get everything, but it could be gained by a reckless goalkeeper charging out for everything, dropping everything, punching everything, but hardly ever catching anything. By mixing the two, it's impossible to gain both at the same time. So if you tried to gain the aggression one and just flew out for everything, you'd have a really bad claim proficiency, most likely, and vice versa. So we can plot these two metrics against each other in a scatter plot. which shows in a traffic light scenario, these are the 88 keepers that face more than 200 crosses in those top 4 European leagues compared to their league average. And we can begin to see from the bottom right, you've got Paul Zubakai in the bottom left, all the way up to keepers like Kevin Trapp and Thibaut Courtois, who came a lot compared to average, and when they did come, they tended to catch the ball. So we tend to think that these are the keepers you'd want on your team. So it's all well and good having that as a scatter plot that the club might be able to return to. Every so often I think, okay, yeah, that keeper looks like they're good at dealing with crosses, but really you want to come up with a new number just for purposes of simplicity, right? So if you want to compare it with, for example, a number from a scouting report, with other metrics, say a shot stopping metric or a passing metric that the club may use, or their goal impact score, it's really useful to have like the perceived ability of their crossing down to one number. So how can we do this? Well, if this is just a kind of a chunk of that graph, and we want to really measure how far away each keeper is from the very top right of the graph, where they'd be like off the chart in terms of aggression and claim proficiency, we can just do this using basic GCSE maths to test the distance, the length of the hypotenuse. So we can essentially come up with a hypotenuse ranking, which height ranking for short. This is how the keepers rank from Courtois on Trapp right up at the top to Mignolet and Zubakai right at the bottom out of the 88 strong sample. But is it repeatable? That's a big question. So the height ranking actually has a correlation of 0.7, which is Pearson's R, and it has an R squared of 0.5, which is statistically significant at 5%, to preempt the questions I'd probably get at the end. And your height is a 0.7 correlation with your parents' height to give an idea of the intuition, like in terms of, like when you think of like someone's parents, they're likely to be a similar height to themselves, at least to a degree. So that kind of gives an idea for if a keeper performs well in 2013-14, they're fairly likely to 2014-15. However, the hypotenuse ranking is a lot more repeatable than our aggression and claims percentage on their own. So for example, in 2013-14, Manuel Neuer, rather than being here, was more kind of up here. And as a result, I think we can kind of describe this as like a colour sliding almost phenomenon, where they're kind of pivoting about the top right, but their distance from the top right is kind of staying fairly similar from season to season. But there are outliers. It's obviously not a perfect correlation. And Kevin Trapp and Julian Speroni kind of embody the outlier effect. And I think to a degree they can be explained to some extent. So Trapp, for example, is a young keeper. He's likely to be on an upward development curve, but that explains why he was able to go from around the middle up towards the top right. Although there's still likely to be a lot of noise and randomness in there that I'll describe how we can go about taking some of that out in a second. But I think it would be fair to say that some of that improvement could be put down to a young keeper improving. And Speroni, meanwhile, did the complete opposite. He regressed from being up towards more in the top right towards being down towards the top left between 2013, 14 and 14, 15, which could be attributed to the opposite, maybe that he's at the other end of the age curve. But again, there is a lot of noise in this. So how can we improve this correlation and get rid of some of the noise that affects the season correlation? Well, first of all, I think we can redraw the penalty box. So here I've divided it. There's a massive disparity between the 43% and the 13, 12, 12% that kind of surrounds it. So either side of the arbitrary dividing line I decided, you've got keepers being judged by a 30 percentage points difference in terms of the likelihood that they'll come to claim a cross, when in reality it's likely to be very small. So the first thing to do would be to make the bit around the goal a lot more kind of nuanced in terms of the actual percentage that we'd expect a keeper to come to try and claim the ball. So that would be the first step. Another step would be to go beyond location, because at the moment all this is testing is where the ball ends up in the box, according to the coordinates of where either the keeper deals with it, or where it's headed away by a defender, or headed or controlled by an attacker. We can maybe factor in things like the position of the cross, maybe even things like the weather, because if it's swirly and wet, maybe the keepers will be less confident at coming to deal with it compared with average. We can also look to factor in the amount of players in the goalkeeper's way when they come to deal with the ball, because that's presumably going to be a factor, right? If there's no one in the box, you'd probably expect them to catch it in most places if they're kind of in the region. But if there's like 5 Andy Carroll-sized players from the attacking team bearing down on them, they've probably got a smaller chance. Equally, we could use more seasons of data. So, although I tested the top 4 leagues in Europe for the hypotenuse ranking, the repeatability was only done on the Bundesliga and the Premier League for reasons of time constraints. And that was only a sample of about 30 keepers that faced sufficient crosses for me to test them. So the sample is smaller than it ideally would be for like statistical I guess, robustity and validity. So that would just be something to test quickly again, the repeatability in other leagues as well, to ensure that this correlation of 0.7 is legit, essentially. So now we come on to a slide which features the first application of this research, which regards the common perception that David Ospina is too short to be a goalkeeper. So we have a quote here which I drew from the Secret Footballer article in The Guardian from a few years ago, when he said that he spoke with a coach. He only said at the top 5 clubs, so we might have made it up. But the coach said that they value physical attributes over technical attributes when they're looking for a keeper, and 6 foot is no longer tall enough. And this is kind of an idea that's kind of come out of sports science. There was a paper written in 2009 which said that between 1970 and 2000 or something like that, there'd been a massive growth in terms of player height and BMI in all positions, but particularly amongst goalkeepers. And one of their concluding points was scouts should pay attention to body shape when selecting potential players for their squads. So that would lead us to think that Ospina may be too short to be a goalkeeper at being just 6 foot or 6'1". Maybe there is going to be a massive link between a player's height and their hypotenuse ranking when it comes to deal with crosses. There isn't. It's statistically insignificant, so we can't reject the null hypothesis that there is absolutely no relationship between height and hypotenuse ranking. We should also state though that I think about 1m82, 1m83 is 6 foot, so they're all probably in the 70th percentile of height anyway. But there's still 20 centimetres plus between Sommer and Pantilimon, Irureta and Fraser Forster, for example, but their hypotenuse rankings in 2014-15 were pretty much the same. And I think the R-squared of that is about 0.06, although it is statistically insignificant. But I haven't tried any other regression models to, again, preempt the probable question. So how else can this be applied? Well, first of all, in terms of coaching, if it's identified that season on season, for example, a player is not very good at dealing with crosses, that might be one to work out with the defence. Then that may work with how a team wants to position its defensive corners, for example, if the keeper seems to be particularly fallible. For the goalkeeper coach, if it seems that their keeper has a weakness or a strength, it might be something to work on or not in relation to the other attributes of their game. In terms of scouting, for the opposition scout, it gives you like a longitudinal knowledge of that, the opposition keeper's genuine kind of level of how they are dealing with crosses over seasons, rather than maybe just sending a scout to watch the previous game or whatever. The previous game? Yeah, the game before you play. Which will give a very small sample, and as I say, all keepers do these things some of the time. So a keeper like Mignolet or Zubakarai might have a game when they make their like 3 claims in a season, you might think, oh, there's nothing to exploit there. But if we look at this over time, we can actually find out kind of what a keeper's true level is. There was an interesting first cut for recruitment. So clubs like Liverpool, for example, who are well noted as having had problems dealing with corners and crosses, for example, if they were to identify, for example, 10 or 15 keepers that they thought performed well according to this metric, maybe they'd then be some that they'd be interested to look at according to their other KPIs that they value for looking at goalkeepers, and then send scouts out to have a look in person, or whatever the policy is at Liverpool. It's also interesting to note for team style though. So for example, for a team like Barcelona or Bayern Munich who don't face many crosses, it's probably not so problematic if their keeper doesn't perform as well at it. It's probably more important that their keeper's good with his feet, for example. But then on the contrary, if your team faces an awful lot of crosses and the problems like being noted, that you're suffering from that, or you have had a keeper retire and looking for a replacement and you face a lot of crosses, this really could be something that you might be interested to look into. And the algorithms within this are all completely customizable according to like teams' kind of perceptions. So as I said, a punch was deemed to be halfway between a claim and a cross, claim and fail. In terms of measuring the claim efficiency, the club might think a punch is more like 0.7 or 0.8 in that golf, that the game can be changed at the click of a button. And again, in terms of combining the aggression and the claim efficiency, being 2% above the average factors the same weighting in terms of calculating their hypotenuse ranking. Again, that was just me just kind of smashing them together. The club might disagree with that and might want to tailor that, which again would be completely easy to do. So yeah, thank you.